This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Can you all hear me?
Some people have muted.
That's all right.
Yes,
That's all right.
Good morning.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today for this consultative session. I would have already spoken with some of you while conducting the surveys. So those of you that I am meeting and speaking with for the first time, a pleasure to quote unquote meet you. Thanks for joining us for this session. Based on the feedback I received from many of you while conducting the surveys, this is an exercise that many of you expressed would be very helpful for you with your respective organizations and moving forward with developing your social media policies. I am Marcia Branch, one of the consultants on this project, and I am joined by Dr. Martin Inmick, who's the other consultant and a policy specialist. My background is in media. I started out in journalism and made that move to communications for development, quote unquote PR, but we'll say DevComs. I mainly work as a consultant across various UN agencies, and this is one of the projects that I am working on of late. Dr. Inmick is a policy specialist who's worked for many years with UNICEF, FAO, and various other UN organizations, but I cannot do him justice, so I will hand over to him and allow him to introduce himself and share a little bit of his background. Dr. Inmick?
Thank you, Marcia. Well, good morning to all of you. Good afternoon for me here in Italy. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I hope that we'll have a very productive and interactive session with all of you. As Marshall indicated, my name is Martin Immink. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and yes, I have been working in policy formulation, although most of it in public policy and not private policy. So for me, this was also somewhat of a new experience. I am definitely not an expert in social media. So Marshall and I, we in a way complement each other very well for this particular project. And I'm very happy to be here with you and to have a chance to interact and to also learn from you, because we see this as a two-way conversation rather than a professorial lecture. So with that, I think perhaps we can ask the participants to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Inmick. Yes, so like Dr. Inmick said, we're going to ask you to introduce yourselves. And if we could maybe get one representative from each station to just share what you are hoping to achieve from this session. Anyone? Let's start with Nova Gordon Bell.
Hi, good morning. Nova Gordon Bell here, representing Karima.
Thank you. Suzette?
Right.
Would you like to go?
Really think it's important. So Dr. White director asked me. I'm just saying, I think it's a very important policy. So we had to be represented here this morning. So thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. And also special thanks to Dr. Livingston, who I would have had conversations with as part of the interviews I conducted to help formulate the questions for the survey. So thank you very much for Karimac's involvement. Let's move on to Michael Elcock.
Hi, morning.
Morning.
Morning. Yes, please. My name is Michael Elcock. I am a member of the Barbados Government Information Service. I work in the web and social media section, and I guess we're always looking to learn and find out what's going on out there. And to add that to what we currently do, we have our own way of approaching our social media policy. So it'd be interesting to see what is going to be coming out of this meeting with these different people to see how y'all handle social media.
Thank you, Michael. I'm glad you said that, because one of the things that came out of the surveys is how the approach from the government information services across the region compared with the media houses. So that's something I would love to hear come up in the discussions today. So what, as we enter into exchanging thoughts and ideas, perhaps you can share a little bit on that. Thank you so much, Michael. Deveron Bruce.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Deveron Bruce. As indicated, I am with UETV, and I too am also here to, in essence, understand and get a better sense of where the policy is going regionally and how it can be possibly utilized within my space. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Ms. Carew, Janet Carew, are you with us? I see UETV logged in here, so I'm not sure if there's another representative. I believe Ms. Carew was to join us today. All right, we'll move on to Esther Jones, GIS Barbados. Hi, Esther.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm Esther Jones. I'm the web content manager at the Barbados Government Information Service. And we have actually designed a social media policy, and it's in draft form right now. So we're hoping to get some extra points. And as Michael said, ours is a little bit different. So it'd be good to see how other people approach the policy. So I'm excited.
Well done. Thank you, Esther. We look forward to hearing, some of the challenges you guys may have had with formulating that and just the general content of it, if you're able to share. Jason Elcock.
Good morning. I am Jason Elcock. Is everybody hearing me?
Loud and clear.
Yes.
I am the manager of corporate communications at the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And the Parliament has its own television frequency where we broadcast parliamentary content. I'm responsible for internet, social media, and our participation here is, like my predecessors would have said, to understand where the media is going in terms of their social media policy. We are not a media house in the strictest sense, but we are considered media just because of the fact that we run a television and radio station. And we have guidelines that govern our staff on how we function in terms of portraying the events that take place in Parliament, but it isn't a full-fledged policy as yet. And so I hope to take some information back, so maybe we can formulate something that is tailored specific to us.
Thank you very much, Jason. Joel Ali.
A very good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning, loud and clear.
I'm representing the, Yes, I'm representing the Ghana National Broadcasting Authority. I'm currently the public relations manager. So we regulate television, radio, and cable broadcasting in Guyana. So we are the regulatory body, not necessarily the media, but we of course regulate that in Guyana. Here, our mandate is to regulate and develop the national broadcasting sector. So hopefully at this meeting, I'm hoping, because we do not currently have a social media policy. So I'm hoping to learn how we can utilize this framework in incorporating and developing our own. So I do look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joel. Mr. Pickering, Carlton, good morning. Carlton, you're muted, so you need to unmute if you're with us. Okay. All right. So let's. Did Joette Penn? I don't think you went already. Joette, can you unmute?
Hi. Morning.
Hi.
Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
Hi, my name is Joette Penn. I am digital manager at ZNS in the Bahamas. It's run by the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas, which is the state-owned television and radio stations. Currently, I am new in the post. We, to my knowledge, have not devised a social media policy as yet. What we do presently at the Broadcasting Corporation is use our social media platforms as another outlet to get our television programming and radio programming out. So I'm very interested in seeing where this meeting goes and where these deliberations goes and how they can influence what we're trying to do here by getting our policies together.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joette. And Marlene?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Marlene Kumar from Great Police Productions here. I am the CEO, and we also don't have a social media policy. So looking over the draft, it looks like it's a great first step and guidance for us to develop our own.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Marlene. So guys, I just want to remind you that
Marsha, this is Janet. I didn't have a moment to speak.
Hi, yes, we came to you earlier, but we didn't hear you. So
yeah, I figured that much. My greatest apologies. I'm working from home as I am not feeling very well. So apologies for not putting on my camera. Janet Carew, UETV, not traditional media, but still we do have television channels throughout the region, and we're predominantly information and knowledge channels, as we put it. And the institution UWI does have a social media policy, but we do realize there is some augmentation to be done when it comes to media. So we're looking to see how we could bridge these two to help us develop a social media policy that governs UETV as we move ahead. And I do look forward to hearing from all of the other members of the team. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Ms. Carew. I'm sorry you're not feeling well. I wish you better, but thanks for joining us today nonetheless. Let's try one last time for Carlton Pickering. Carlton, are you there?
Yes, I ran off to do an emergency because
that's okay.
Yes, good morning. I am Carlton Pickering, the CEO of Creative Communication Network here in Anguilla, television production station. We don't have a social media policy, but we have some guidelines that we normally use with dealing with social media. So I am hoping that from this discussion and deliberation, we're able to come up and formulate a policy like so that we can work with.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Carlton. All right, guys, thanks for sharing. I just want to remind you that today's session is interactive. So we welcome your participation, your thoughts, your feedback throughout the session. And if you haven't already done so, if you can just open up the draft policy framework so that you can refer to it if needed or as needed during the session. I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Inmik, who's going to lead in delivering the session, and I'll jump in as needed. And I'm just going to share the screen now so that we can move on to the presentation. All right. Dr. Inmik?
Okay, excuse me. Thank you, Marshall. I'm going to excuse myself a little bit because the weather has been changeable and that's had created havoc with my throat, but hopefully this will not interfere in our session. So as Marshall already indicated, this is a two-way session. Hopefully we may able to give you some inputs that are useful to you. And of course, we continue to want to learn from you as well. So please chime in at any time, or if you have any questions, or if something is not quite clear, we hope to hear from you as well. At the end, we will ask you to perhaps participate in a very brief exchange among all the participants at the end of the session. An important input, and as the next slide also will show, it follows essentially the framework document. So we will be making reference during this session to the framework document, and it might be useful for you to have this on hand. Now, the next 60, 70 or so minutes that we will be talking to each other is sort of divided into three different sections, if you like. The introduction and background will tell you a little bit of what the initial analysis has shown as to what the situation is in the Caribbean area with respect to social media. It's a result primarily of surveys that were conducted by Marshall, and in which perhaps some of you also participated directly. Then we will deal with the framework document as a guide from 2 points of view. One, as far as content is concerned, and secondly, from a more process point of view, which you may find more useful when we think of that process of both drafting the policy, implementing it, and monitoring as it has been implemented. Then the third part, we hope to make some suggestions how you may want to proceed. And it's very gratifying to hear actually that some of your organizations have already something in place, either guidelines or a draft policy. You know, obviously, what we would urge you to do in those cases is to build on what is already existing and not start from scratch at all. Those organizations which have no guidelines and or no draft policies may find, that they may have to start a little bit from the beginning. Now, just to set the setting in the next slide, and this is all the result of a survey work by Marsha. And this is highly summarized, and a more detailed description of this you will find again in one of the appendices of the report, the document itself. But in highly summarized fashion, it was found that the professional and personal use of social media is expanding. This is obviously not unique to the Caribbean. I think this is fairly much worldwide, but it certainly is true in the Caribbean area. We did find that a few of your companies did have guidelines. So far as we could determine, there was no final policy in place, but I'm also put the caveat here that the surveys were conducted about a year ago. So obviously things may have changed during the intervening period. We draw sort of a distinction, if you like, between guidelines and a policy, in the sense that guidelines perhaps say, well, do this, good sense, hopefully, you use your common sense to, when you access information from or you post information to social media. A policy, I think, goes quite a bit farther than that. And I hope that our discussion this afternoon or this morning for you will also show this. Obviously, there are problems which were identified, again, probably not unique to the Caribbean area, in terms of a lot of fake news and misinformation being posted on social media, online bullying, hate speech or defamation, and distribution of inappropriate materials. I don't know if someone would like to indicate whether some other important aspect has been left out here in a general sense. or this more or less covers it. Does anyone want to contribute anything at this point? If not, then we'll go down to the next. And in the interviews, in the analysis that was conducted, there are also identified a number of challenges. First of all, of course, the countries in the Caribbean largely have small populations, small island populations, and it's easy to identify people, so that anonymous posting is difficult in the sense that even though if you use an anonymous handle or something like that, people pretty much know who is doing this, who is the person who actually posted the information or the messages. A very important issue that you will see will come through quite often, all of that we are discussing this afternoon, is this balance between free speech and what might be potential damage to company brand and relationship with sponsors, particularly when these are commercial stations or commercial outlets and so on. Where do you draw the balance? To what extent should the policy, well, say actually the policy should be very careful not to infringe on the right of free speech, but at the same time also protect the company brand and the relationship with any sponsors. And particularly for government-owned or operated or politically affiliated stations and so on, there's always a danger that a particular post can have political or social fallout. And this may again be damaging to the station and so on. And then we also found that there is some resistance to change in staff. This is, I think, not very unique to media outlets in the Caribbean. I think this is sort of generally true in many companies in different industries and in different sectors and so on. Change always seems to be sort of threatening. People have to make adjustments, and this is not always well received at all. Then we also found that the question here is why should a company have a social media policy? And here maybe I'm going to invite people to contribute. We put up one, which again came out of the analysis of the surveys, and that is to guard against inappropriate use of the social media by company staff, to guard against inappropriate use. But maybe other reasons why companies should have a social media policy. I don't know if anyone wishes to contribute anything at this point. They see in other needs for a company's social media policy, particularly those who have already had some discussions about this, as was indicated by one of the participants earlier. Does anyone wish to contribute anything at this point?
I'm going to go a step further.
Hi, this is Joette from the Bahamas.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Go on.
With guarding against inappropriate social media use by all staff, does that pertain to the entire corporation, one? And does it pertain to how you govern yourself when you are administrating the corporation's platforms, or is that personal as well?
Oh, do you want me to answer that, Martin, or?
Yeah, I'm glad you could. Yes. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Joette. I'm glad you asked that question because that's an area that we focus on heavily in the surveys. And we're going to discuss that as we go through the slides and get deeper into that. But one thing I will say is that there's not going to be a one size fits all approach. You're going to have to look at your organization, the way you operate, and also how your organization is made up. Because as you may know, here in the Caribbean, you will have some corporations that include news and entertainment, radio, television, print, digital, all under one roof. Yeah. And you may have others that may just be a radio station. So there are a lot of things to take into consideration with regards to your question, and we're going to delve deeper into that as we go further.
And also in relation to the question whether a policy should apply to all members of staff or everyone who's working for the corporation, I think later on you will see we have tried to identify different sort of actor groups, journalists, media managers, and so on, and try to, in an initial sense, define what their respective responsibilities are under, or could be under, a media policy. But the idea is that the policy would, yes, be all inclusive in terms of covering all who are associated in one form or another with the company or the station or the outlet and so on. So we have sort of anticipated the first part of the question. Now, one could also legitimately ask, so why a regional social media policy framework? It's not a policy, it's a policy framework. And we thought that it might facilitate coherence in company social media policies. And what do we mean by coherence? As Marsha already said, it's not a question of straitjacketing or one size fits all, because companies vary in the services that they offer, the setting in which they operate, the challenges that they face, as well as the opportunities perhaps. And so it's not with the idea of that all companies should have the same social media policy, but that in general and underlying there's some coherence, and particularly as also particular individuals may switch among different companies and so on over time. It might be useful if those have the same general orientation and so on, but although the content of itself may vary quite considerably. We also thought that this framework should guide the drafting, implementing, and monitoring of company policies. In other words, there is a process, okay? And that process starts with drafting, and we'll talk a little bit, you know, what may be happening there, implementing it actually, but also, and this part is particularly often overlooked, to monitor how the policy is doing, what are the levels of adherence to certain aspects of the policy. Is it effective? It's not effective, and so on, and may require therefore adjustments over time. We'll talk a little bit further about that as well. Now, as we said, and I think this is an important part, a policy should really always respond to identified problems and issues and opportunities that result from an analysis. In this particular case, surveys were conducted. Some of you may have participated in those surveys, may have contributed your points of view, and so on. But it has to be a clear problem set and opportunity set that the policy actually should respond to. So we found, in other words, again, in a highly summarized fashion, and more details to be found in your framework document, that informational social accounts is readily available, but often inaccurate, as you, some of you who participated in the survey have indicated. We already said the problem of fake news and so on, which is also true for social media accounts. that they're subject to being hacked, which may again result in essentially theft of information, as well as the posting of inaccurate and misleading information. And also, many of you indicated there really is a need to guide staff with very precise rules as to how to use the information and how to process it and so on. So there is an identified need, okay, for the policy. The policy framework tries to anticipate this as well. Other points that came out of the analysis on the next slide and so on, that indeed different media outlets, different companies and so on provide different levels of guidance to their staff as to what to post and what not to post, and particularly when it relates to personal social media accounts. This again will bring us into the area of the personal right essentially to free speech as versus not damaging images or relationships that the company for which you work may actually maintain. And so there is indeed a concern about what staff post on their personal account. And the question is, at what point is a particular individual posting as a private, purely private individual person, as compared to being an employee of a particular company and therefore having some relationship, direct relationship with that company and responsibility to safeguard the brand of that company. And lastly, it was also reported on the next slide that there is some difficulty to get buy-in to a policy, journalists and others, again about the concern about the infringement of free speech rights with respect to their personal social media accounts. So this issue of free speech, the right of free speech as an individual that all of us enjoy, as compared to our responsibility towards safeguarding the interests of the employer or the company we work for. So the message here is, again, as I said earlier, the policy is formulated in response to a very careful analysis and understanding of the problems, the issues, and the opportunities that may exist that result from a careful analysis and so on. Now, when it comes to content of a policy, normally the policy has a vision, and the vision refers to what are the long-term expectations, what should be in place as the result of several efforts. Now we make a suggestion here. This doesn't say necessarily that everyone has to adopt this. It can be adjusted, it can be modified, and so on. But what it does read is that staff at all times make responsibly professional and personal use of social media, post, and to access information that is factual, fair, does not harm company interest, and respects human dignity. So these are start out with 4 criteria. The information is factual, it is fair, it doesn't harm company interest, and it respects also human dignity, the right, which is basically a human right. Okay. So as a vision, this is what we would expect, we would hope would be in place, would be happening at the end of a certain time period. Now, for that to happen, there may be several things that are needed, one of which may be a policy, but it may not completely depend on having just a policy. That may be necessary, but it may not be sufficient. So the policy in the previous slide, sorry, also has a mission statement. Okay, what is it that the policy is expected to contribute to the long-term vision that should be in place? Okay, and again, this is in the way of suggestions. Okay, but they read something like, okay, staff consistently apply practices that result in factual and respectful information when professionally and personally posting to and accessing information from social media. Okay, so now there's already a sort of a proactive quality to this. Staff consistently apply practices, okay, which result in what we would is the long-term vision of the company and so on. Maybe not to make this dragging on too long, maybe let me just pause here very briefly, see if anyone would like to just react to this or contribute something or make an observation as to something like the policy, vision, and mission. I don't know if anyone wishes to make a contribution at this point or request for clarification or anything that you may want to bring up. Is there anyone?
Hi, Marlene from Belize here. I just have a quick question. We talk about social media in general. However, there are personal communication apps that are also used somewhat like social media. Let's take, for example, WhatsApp, which a lot of people use to conduct business, and they may post things on their status as well. Is that taken into consideration in the policy, in the framework you put together?
Marsha, my answer would be yes, but you're the expert, so.
I'm gonna jump in here and say yes, because we would consider WhatsApp to be a form of social media, not just your Instagram, your YouTube, your Facebook, but WhatsApp would be considered to be a form of social media.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to contribute at this point? I hope I haven't put you all to sleep.
No, you haven't. Joette from the Bahamas. I think that with the policy on the screen, that there are two ways of looking at it, because I think most companies and corporations have something like this in their employee guidelines or handbook or whatever, because of the prevalence of social media. But I think when you get to the point of being a social media professional or being in the broadcasting industry, where your face is known, and either your face or your voice or whatever it is that you used in broadcasting is known, that there is kind of a different line that you would have to follow, rather than the regular person in a corporation that is just adhering to their employee book. And I think earlier, I think is it Branch?
Yes.
Yes.
We would get into the area. Yeah, we would get into the area of free speech, because what I find is that, because myself, I have personal social media platforms, but I also post on behalf of the corporation, and there is a line. But I think that we have to be able to give people the freedom even has to be guidelines, but we have to be able to give the people the freedom to have personal media platforms and to be able to express themselves in certain ways. So does this policy, do we elaborate on it when we move further?
Yes, we do. And let me just remind you, this is a framework. So this is a guidance document. So the stations will then develop their policies based on the guidelines outlined in the framework. And one of the things that come up in or is addressed in the framework is the different actor groups and responsibilities of different actor groups and how you would handle that. And that is not just dependent on what is outlined in the framework, but some of the things you also need to take into consideration would be things like your company's ethos, the culture in your country, the type of station you are working with, you know, like I said, your ethos. And then you also find, which is one of the things we covered as well, is even among on-air staff, you can delve into different areas of what guidelines would look like. So you may want to go as far as outlining specific guidelines for journalists compared to those persons who work for the same organization but are entertainers. Yeah. So we addressed all of that. And like I said, and I can't stress this enough, we can't tell you exactly what to do in your station. You can look at the guidelines, you can decide, okay, this suits us here, and so we want to pull this and work with this with our station. And just to give an example, let's say you are with a station that has news and you have radio and you have FM radio and you're dealing with entertainment, and you have your DJs who maybe they have a following and you want to capitalize on their following and give them the freedom to be able to voice their opinion and share their thoughts within reason, because you don't want to do anything that you don't want to have them do or say anything that is not in keeping with the organization's standards. However, a journalist may not have as much leeway, because under the tenets of journalism, it's not about your opinion. It is about what is fact. It's about what is news. Yeah. So you can then decide, do we have a different set of guidelines for our entertainers versus our journalists? And you can really drill down to be that specific if you want. Yeah. But we're gonna get into that some more and have some conversations about it.
I think three more people have their hands up. The first one, I think, was Shamar.
Good morning. My name is Shamar from Jamaica. So I just wanted to quickly touch on Joette's point. I was saying that I agree with her to an extent where freedom of speech is concerned, because as you said, at the end of the day, you don't want the person's opinion to necessarily vary too far, stray too far from that of the organization. For example, a journalist, as you said, we look to journalists for facts. So even though the person does have their own opinion, or they are allowed to speak and they do have freedom of speech, we also have to understand that if I see somebody on my TV every night or listen to them every day talking about news, I'm going to assume that everything they speak is factual. And I mean, it's not right of me to think that everything they say is factual. I think they put on social media is factual or of a certain standard, but at the end of the day, as humans, we kind of do automatically think that everybody that does news or is a journalist always speaks facts. So we also think about the representation of the company where that is where freedom of speech is concerned.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see who's next. Yes.
Can you see who's next,
Mr.
Martin?
Mr. Bruce. Mr. Bruce.
Okay.
Hey, good morning again. I am hoping that I'm not jumping the gun a bit too far, but I am curious as to whether we will get into things such as, for instance, data protection and social media policy, because I know that here in Barbados and across the region, we're heading in a direction where we are implementing data protection laws as it relates to access to information. For instance, most recently, we've had quite a bit of a stir here in Barbados regarding a ministry, for instance, regarding a similar issue. Now, that is government, but when it comes to private organizations, for instance, does the policy really speak to whether, for instance, data is being tracked or analyzed or shared, for instance, with third parties, and issues of, ownership of that data and how the data is being protected, those type of issues? I'm curious as to whether those will be raised as well, or are they part of the policy?
What the framework does speak to is the importance of aligning your organization's policy with your country's legislation. Okay, so when we carried out the surveys, a few of the questions sought to ascertain information as to whether the respondents were aware of their country's legislation as relates to information and media, and also whether they were aware as to if their organization's rules aligned with their country's legislation. And ironically, most of the respondents were not aware. So this is something that needs to be considered. If we're working in media, and there are quite a few countries across the Caribbean right now where legislation is currently in the works that relates to communication, online communication. And so that's something that organizations not only need to be aware of, but need to engage their staff to ensure that their staff, particularly, your on-air persons or persons responsible for disseminating news, ensure that they are aware of national legislation and that what they're doing aligns with that.
Let me just, yes, the fact that, that your organization, Devon, is working on data protection and perhaps establishing policy undoubtedly resulted from a certain analysis that you have done to come up with the idea that this indeed needs to be addressed. It's an issue that needs to be addressed. So this are obviously as a result of the analysis that have conducted, could be incorporated in social media policy for your company. Not necessarily other companies may have detected this as a problem, or because it's not a concern, or the service they offer really don't interact with that. And so their policy may not have a part on data protection. So again, here, this depends very much on the company, its services, its setting, and particularly what the analysis has shown, sort of the pre-policy analysis has shown as to be major problems, issues that need to be addressed. So I think this is very good that, that you, as a result of the analysis, came up with the need for data protection policies. I think Carol, his hand is up.
Okay, hi, good morning. Carol Francis from Jamaica. I've been listening, and the whole thing, social media is all about personality. And so viewers or listeners connect with the personalities, but they must be cognizant that they follow and engage with the personalities because of who they are and their role with the organization. But the informality of social media often makes people relaxed. And we must, I think, I know you are saying it's a suggestion, but I think that there are some things that must be in stone about how you use social media, because you could tarnish or bring into disrepute your organization. So in terms of what you retweet, and not because you have your own personal social media outside of the company, because you are the face of the company, the voice of the company. You are seen as being a part of the company. So whatever you tweet or retweet or post becomes almost like the voice of the company. So there must be strict rules and guidelines as to how you utilize your personal pages, even as you are a part of a bigger entity.
Thank you for that contribution. I just want to say that, again, that is something that we are covering. And what's very interesting is I know recently, I can't remember the organization, but an organization in Jamaica, there was a legal battle between the organization and a staff member over something similar. And one of the things that you have to do is strike the balance between protecting the organization's brand and not bringing it into disrepute, as you said, and also not infringing upon freedom of speech when you speak about persons' personal social media pages. And again, it's important to get that balance right, because on one hand, even though it's their personal page, they're still seen as the voice of the organization outside of office hours. They're aligned with that brand, yeah, depending on what the setting is with your organization. So it's about getting that balance right. And again, can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. You have to sit down and look at how your organization interacts with the public, how the public views your facing persons, and you tailor to suit, right?
Okay.
While also taking into consideration people's rights to freedom of speech and also protecting the organization's brand.
I just wanted to say, Mrs. Branch, just one quick thing. Additionally, is once I would think that once a company employs somebody, even if it's your personal page, because as I say, it is linked, that the person should be. There should be editorial guidelines that each company possess, and then the person is employed with the understanding that whatever it is that they're doing must fit within the editorial guidelines of the particular entity.
Correct. And that's something I brought up in the session on Tuesday, in that one of the challenges you may find is if you didn't have something in place with staff that are currently at an organization, there may be some resistance to change. However, as you put things in place and it is understood that anyone who is seeking to be employed by that organization, they sign their contract, they're agreeing to certain things. So that makes it a little easier. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna hand over to Martin just so we can stay on track with time.
Well, I think Janet has the hand up.
Sorry
And,
about that. I can't see the hand, so thank you. Thanks.
Yes, and
Oh, just quickly,
please go ahead.
Marsha, Martin, colleagues, just to inquire on two ends. In relation to the policy framework, do we have a legal hinge on it at all? Did we seek any legal counsel on the framework? That's one. Two, and so pulling together, is there any existing policies from any entity like a CARICOM, or do we have the backing of CARICOM to enable this to happen? And my final comment is, in your analysis, how wide were the gaps between various countries when it comes to social media policies or that governs data protection, and so on? How wide were the gaps? Because I'm thinking that we get this framework done, but everybody's at a different stage in their own development, and that might hinder that one policy that we're trying to put forward. So these were my my three questions. Thank you.
We are not trying to put forward one policy, Janet. This is a framework, it's a guide. And so therefore the various stations can use the guide to assist them with drafting their respective policies. So it's not a case of having a policy for the region. It's a framework, which is a guidance document, and the stations can then use this framework to assist them with pulling together their respective policies. So that's one. The second one is with respect to, you asked me about CARICOM and getting support from CARICOM. Again, just a framework. The organizations then develop their respective policies. So we're not seeking to develop a policy for the region. We're developing a framework that individual media houses can use to guide them with developing their policies. And then your next question spoke to legal counsel. We would have conducted some pre-interviews with persons to help develop the survey questions. But again, what you develop, there's a difference between a framework and a policy. And I'm going to give way to Dr. Emick to explain the difference between the two, as that's his specialty. But a framework is a guidance document, yeah? The policy now, when you develop a policy, that's when you seek to put it in place, and that's where your organization then needs to get the legal side of things involved with that. But I'm going to hand over to Dr. Emick and let him explain that a little bit more succinctly.
Well, I think, Marcia, you did already a remarkable job.
Thank you.
It is true. This document and what we're talking about too are really to guide each of the individual organizations to develop their policy based on their analysis of the issues, the problems, and the opportunities that they detect, and that to create a need for having a company-specific policy and so on. So that really is the idea. And regional maybe is somewhat misleading here. We could have just called a social media policy framework as well.
I don't think that very much. I don't think that is misleading to use regional in this context, because the framework is being shared regionally. I think where the misconception may come is that a framework and a policy, or a policy framework and a policy, are two different things. Yeah, a framework is not a policy. So the framework is being distributed regionally, and regionally media houses can use the framework to come up with their respective policies.
That's correct. Yes, absolutely.
I think you're right, Marcia. I think the framework is just a guide, and each one of us have to develop our policy within that framework that has been given. So there's a difference. There's a far difference between a framework and a policy. A policy is what the company developed for its own use.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah, Marcia, thank you very much. This is very clear. I thank you for this. Yeah, thanks again.
No problem, Janet. My pleasure.
Joette still has her hands up.
Oh, sorry. My question actually stemmed from what we were talking about before we got into the legality of the framework, et cetera. It was about going back to what we were talking about, the personalities and social media. And it was actually, it's a question to everybody that's on the call. I find that, and maybe this is particular to here, because social media that has been entirely integrated into the Broadcasting Corporation and what it does as yet. But does anybody else on the that is having that's in broadcasting, or does the framework as well speak to when you contract or having personalities building into their contract?
Yes.
Building into a handbook or a policy, the fact that they have to participate in social media, especially when you're a person like a radio personality or a television personality or even a journalist?
Okay, so very good question. One of the actor groups we listed in the framework would be contracted persons. So for example, let's say you have a radio station, you have someone who comes in to host a talk show every day. They're not on staff, not necessarily bound by the organization's rules, yeah, because they're contracted, but you want to ensure that they also are guided with regards to, one, the kinds of things they post since they are affiliated with the organization, and two, they understand their responsibility with regard to posting. And again, what is very important is that these things are developed and made very clear prior to someone coming on staff. Because what happens is if someone comes on board and then you try to say, well, you have to do X, Y, Z, and it's seen as infringing upon their freedom of speech or whatever, you got a problem. But if you have it clearly outlined in a contract that a person is signing before they start to work with the organization, I kind of, I wouldn't say eliminates, but minimizes some of the friction that you may experience, and certainly that I experience in terms of feedback from some staff members when conducting the surveys. So it's very important that people understand before they enter your doors what is expected of them. And when you are developing your respective policies, you really want to, if you look at the various actor groups, you really want to consider what you expect from contracted workers, and you want to have that outlined in your policy as well, if that is an area that applies to your station and is important to you. Does that answer your question, Joette?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Martin, over to you.
Okay. This, I think, has been extremely useful, and thank you to all of you who made some contribution at this point. Now, so after the policy mission, then we go to the specific objectives of the policy. These are the things that are to be achieved to realize the mission of the policy. And the way we have structured this, this is normally done this way, although if you wish to do it some other way, this is perfectly fine. It's always the policy objective and what are the, what we have called the response menu, or what is the menu of policy actions necessary to achieve that particular objective. And if you go to the table of contents of the document, you will see there are enough, there's no time to go in all of this in detail, of course, and there's no need to because you have it in the document. These are suggestions. But in each case, the policy objective is formulated in relation to eliminating a problem or exploiting a new opportunity or to deal effectively with an issue that has been identified through the analysis, the pre-policy analysis and so on. And then what are the actions necessary in the form of rules of specific actions, either by all actor groups or by specific actor groups to achieve that objective, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about this later on and so on, okay? So that is sort of the content of the policy, okay? The heart of it. Now, we also thought perhaps it might be useful to provide some guidance on the process of arriving essentially to a policy, company-specific policy, its implementation, and the need for monitoring. Excuse me. The first thing is to recognize that the drafting of the policy will require some resources. Now, in this particular case, for a policy, the major resource is staff time. Because we're also advocating that the process is sort of imbued with a number of principles. And in the first and most important part is that it is participatory and inclusive. Everyone has an opportunity to participate and to be included in the process of arriving at a specific company policy. And as we'll see later on, this is also very important for the sustainability of the policy. In other words, make all staff feel they're owners. This is not just a document that imposes a certain burden on them or that imposes sanctions or somehow punishes or something like that. No. What you want to create, I think, in this process of drafting is create ownership of the policy in all members of staff, okay? The process should be transparent, no hidden agendas, nobody, this is all clearly on the table, okay? The process should be empowering. People should be learning in the process and not again being punished for doing something or other and so on. At all times, be respectful of human dignity. This is important. Everybody's contribution is important. Everybody's contribution is valuable. There are no such things as, well, this is a stupid point, or yeah, you don't know what you're talking about, or something like that. Okay, it has to be, recognized that everyone has some contribution to make. Okay, and there should be accountability in the sense of if you commit to doing something, or if you commit in the process of drafting or something like that, a particular portion of it, then you can be held accountable for doing so within the time period agreed to, and so on. Now, the part that is usually overlooked, and this is not only in the case of, let's say, private policy, but also in public policies, okay? And that is the issue of monitoring. That is, once the policy has been implemented, it's there, it's now valid, okay? It now applies to all, okay? Then usually that's it, okay, we go on to other things. And as far as the policy is concerned, the monitoring aspect is very important. First of all, it's an opportunity for learning by doing. That is to say, when we were drafting the policy, maybe we didn't have all the elements, or we didn't quite understand how this would impact in practice, okay? But if we monitor it, somehow set this up, then we can see what works, what doesn't work, who feels harmed by the policy, and so on. And process of learning by doing, okay? Which may require, if we understand, what some of the issues there are, a further adjustment in the policy. In other words, the policy is a living thing. It's not so, somebody said that it should be set in stone. Yes, but it also should be seen as a living document. And as we acquire more experience, okay, and also, as has already been pointed out earlier, there may be changes in relevant legislation to which the company policy has to refer and incorporate any changes that necessitates. And we are very much aware, of course, there are very rapid changes in social media technology. And so the question again there is, what do we need to learn about that, and to what extent does that impact on our policy and require an adjustment, okay? So the policy monitoring is an important part of the process, and it's all usually a part of this overlooked. So often thought that once the policy is implemented, we said, well, it's effective 1st of January. Okay, well, that's it, and we would maintain that policy monitoring is an important part of the whole process. Now the issue, which has also been brought up before about, as you can see in the next slide, is the sustainability of a company policy. In other words, it's been drafted, there's a document, it's been decided, the date when it will be effective and so on. But over time, new people come in, perhaps some people don't like some parts of the policy, so they try consciously to ignore it and so on. And many times we find, the policy, if you like, sort of dies over time. It's there, the document is there, Perhaps most of the staff doesn't even know that it exists anymore, and certainly may not adhere to the rules and assume the responsibilities that they've been assigned under the policy and so on. So these are some points that we thought might be important in this respect. And I'm going to, after that, again, invite some of you to perhaps contribute to some more ideas and so on. But again, as I said earlier, the application all throughout, after the policy has been implemented, of these principles that you saw on the previous slide, I call them human rights principles, the human rights-based principles, but particularly the participation, inclusion, and the empowering quality of a policy will contribute to its sustainability when people feel they are owners of it, not just something that's imposed upon them, but they are owners of it. Also important that the company's social media policy is not seen as sort of a thing on the side there or by itself, but that it be firmly incorporated in overall staff policy. Not sort of an exotic thing on the side or something like that. That as we already said earlier, that the responsibilities of different actor groups, social media, journalists, DJs, and so on, are well defined, so that everybody can be held accountable for the responsibility that have been assigned under the policy to the particular actor group that they belong to. Establishing within the company a permanent platform to share experience, sort of like a monthly seminar or an opportunity in staff meetings or something like that, talk specifically about how people feel about the policy. Are there people who are confused, people who feel heard by it, or people have very positive things to share, will also contribute to sustainability. And as with any policy, and any politician will tell you that, demonstrate policy impact. What really changed, and how do people feel, how do staff and different staff members feel about those changes? Okay, can they be demonstrated? Can they be somehow qualified, or if not, at least in qualitative ways be expressed? Things are better than they were before. Some aspects are worse than they were before, so they need further adjustments, or they require us to rethink again, or something has happened in the company or externally to the company that requires modification because it sort of counteracts any positive impacts that policy may have, and so on. I don't know, before we just go to the last part, if anyone wishes to make any contribution with this idea of the sustainability, that it remains alive and well, and so on, and it remains alive and well for all members of staff. Any other ideas, any particular actions or processes that may be important in relation to this? If not, I don't see any hands up. Okay, then in terms of suggestions, sort of maybe concrete suggestions, we thought we could, and again, the caveat here is in the next slide that what we have called a template for drafting a company social media policy is not meant to be a straitjacket at all, okay? It's sort of an outline, what the policy document may look like, and what are important processes to contribute to the content of each of these sections. But if the company decides to use a different outline or a different template or something like that, okay, that's absolutely up to each and everyone. But anyway, we'll share our ideas, and perhaps afterwards we can listen to some other ideas and so on. The title of the policy, okay. And it's important that in the title of the policy, or somehow it's included the name of the company. In other words, to make certain that we all understand this policy refers to this organization or this station or this outlet and so on. The preface or presentation. Now, if you look, for instance, to the regional framework document, you will see that it follows also this idea that it be signed, it be presented by a high-level officer. In this particular case, Dr. Grant, who is the president of CBU, signed the presentation. But the important thing here is that the message is, this is official company policy. This is not sort of an exotic thing that somebody in the back office dreamed of or something like that. This is official company policy, and it applies to all in the company or are somehow associated with the company. So very high level from the top, etc., is important. Next, the definitions. Now, usually when drafting a policy, a number of terms, particularly technical terms, but not only technical terms, are repeatedly being used. Now, instead of making the text very cumbersome by explaining in each and every case when a particular term is included, again, what it means, usually there is a section up front of definitions of terms that are once or more than once used in the text, so that when reading the text, one doesn't have to go, one can go to this section and say, okay, well, again, what does this term mean? Social media, for instance. Okay, well, what do we mean really by social media and so on? We also try to do this in the framework document, okay? Important that the definitions are clearly and particularly unambiguously described, okay? That means essentially that they're not open to various interpretations or something like that. It needs to be very concrete, as the next slide also suggests. Then the social media challenges faced by the company. Now, this is the part where the results of the participatory and inclusive in-house analysis to identify problems, to identify issues, and to identify opportunities that need to be addressed by the policy are explained, okay? It sets the stage, in other words, for the content of the policy, but it's based on an in-house analysis, which is inclusive and participatory by all, as we already said earlier. Then we go on to expressing then the policy vision and mission, as we also discussed earlier, long-term expectation, what is sustainably to be achieved, and what the policy is expected to contribute to that achievement in the long run. Then next, the policy objectives. In other words, this is by articulating the policy objective, you flesh out, as it were, the mission of the policy, and each objective addresses a particular and very concrete problem, issue, or opportunity that has been identified. And then in relation to each objective, the rules and actions to achieve the objective are written again in clear and unambiguous terms, and really using as much as possible common language. I mean, it must be easy to interpret and read by different staff members who may represent different disciplines from their backgrounds, different experiences, and so on. But the company policy is meant for all staff and not just for a subgroup of staff. It articulates, and again, this also was done, as Marcia pointed out, in the policy framework, the responsibility of different actors. So to identify the different actor groups, as I say, media managers, editors, journalists, DJs, and so on and so forth, okay? And what responsibilities are assigned to each of these actor groups as far as the implementation and adherence to the principles and rules of the policy. Okay, again, very clearly and in as much detail as is possible. I would almost imagine from experience that over time, as you are monitoring the policy and you have discussions about its impact, may have some frustrations that certain actor groups feel and so on, that these responsibility may in the process be redefined over time, but based on real experience and not an upfront articulation of those. Then the plans for policy implementation. How is the policy to be implemented? When will it become effective? Are there any resources needed for its implementation? We said that already in the drafting of the policy, probably some staff time needs to be assigned specifically, okay? And that means basically that certain staff members are freed perhaps up a little bit from certain responsibility and can set aside a portion of their time to undertake certain drafting tasks and so on. So the question of what resources are needed. And also the question important was, if any, staff training is needed, particularly up front. Perhaps training in a little bit more than just awareness raising. Really, you know, if those responsibilities require certain actions, it may also require that staff be trained to undertake those actions, to assume those responsibilities, and so on. And in that way also are empowered. Then finally, in the next line, the plans for monitoring. We already decided that, both at two levels, inside of the company, what's happening with the responsibility, what is to be actually monitored. One idea may be staff adherence to certain rules and so on. Are there to be any sanctions? Is it up to each individual company, obviously, for systematic non-adherence to some of the rules or undertaking the responsibilities in implementing certain policy actions? And important in that sense, if there are to be sanctions, that it's spelled out very clearly under what conditions those sanctions are to be applied, so that people know from the very beginning what are the rules of the game. And if I do not do certain things, or if I do not adequately assume certain responsibilities, and the policy, and you know, this decision obviously by each company has decided that there are to be certain sanctions, when will they be applied? This is very transparent, very upfront. And as we said also, the exterior needs to be monitored in terms of any changes in relevant legislation or social media technology, which require policy adjustments. And again, to spell out who has the responsibility for monitoring and who has the responsibility for making those adjustments, or proposing at least those adjustments over time. So again, very specific, very action-oriented, and so on. And that sort of, in great part, outlines also what is in the document, which provides obviously a lot more detail, for which obviously we don't have the time available to go into, but there's no need to, since you all, I understand, have access to this document. So if you like the formal presentation or something like that answered this point, we invite you all to make additional comments or ask questions or make any observations you would like to make.
Hi, this is Esther.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a couple points to make that I think should be included as like separate sections in a social media policy, because there's so many different areas that you have to look at. For instance, like how the policy on how you speak in groups like WhatsApp groups, because what you do say in a WhatsApp group is liable if you use some form of slander or whatever. It can be liable, and you still are representing your company when in a group. So if you separate it between your company WhatsApp group, between like employees in the company, and then when you are in WhatsApp groups outside of the company, we at GIS, we have an app. And I think if any company has an app, it should be separated in the policy on how that works. In order for you to get the app on particular platforms, you have to follow the policy of Apple and Android. And there's a lot of things that you have to do in order for the app to be on that particular or on those platforms. Also looking at influencers, a separate section should be in the policy, looking at how you will get influencers, what the influencers have to do, and sort of how you find your influencer. And lastly, we do a lot of lives at the Government Information Service, and each live we have to monitor, because again, whatever anyone writes, we can be liable for it. So you should have sort of an outline on how you will monitor a live presentation. We post posting policy before every live, so people know exactly what will be accepted, what will not be accepted, and what will be taken down. So those are just some of my points or suggestions.
Thanks, Esther. One of the things I also want to mention is that you also need to integrate your policy with your existing, the existing organization's rules or guidelines. So because it's social media, it's not going to be, things aren't going to run different from how it would run with your traditional media. So you will integrate the two in terms of like, for example, you mentioned the lives. That's you can pull from your existing, the organization's rules with regards to that in cases like that. And also, I was going to make another point and it's gone clear out of my head. I'm so sorry. Yes, I don't remember what I was going to say with regards to things like WhatsApp. Yes, completely agree with you. But one of the things we want to stress here is that we also need to indicate what you consider to be social media. So yes, I do consider WhatsApp to be social media, and that ties in with any rules or or guidelines as relates to posting on any platform. WhatsApp would be treated in the same way. And with regards to influencers, love that comment in terms of how you find influencers and what they should do. Yes, that's something Dr. Emick and I will discuss. So thank you for that. But we do list in the actor groups, they would fall under actor group, one of the actor groups, in terms of how they would be guided by and how the company's social media guidelines apply to them. I see Michael and Marlene have their hands raised.
Hi, yes, morning. I just wanted to add a quick point to some of the stuff I would have seen in the slides that I think might be useful to add. Mainly in the areas of art direction and creative direction, that's something that tends to be overlooked sometimes in laying out your social media platforms. But the thing with having a art direction stated in your policy, it gives everybody of equal footing on how your pages, how your social media profiles are supposed to look, how you handle branding, how your logo appears. And because we are in government, we gotta pay attention a lot to things like national symbols and stuff like that. You also can put the type of fonts that you use in your design work, the type of design work that you use, the languages, the language you speak or the voice you communicate in. So all of that kind of helps to create a brand identity, which any person that has to integrate into your social media platforms will be able to just come in and hit the ground.
That's true, Michael. What I will say is that organizations usually have brand guidelines. So every organization should have a brand guidelines that outline, like you said, protocol, fonts, logos, all that. And your policy can't stand separate from those things, because part of the reason for having this policy is to protect the company's brand. So it will draw from, or it will adhere to, it will state that it must adhere to the company's brand guidelines.
Yeah. On the final, sorry, one quick more point, just as well as there's also, especially in the early days, there was a view of, one size fits all. So, it doesn't matter if it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, you post all the content to all the platforms all the time. But there's different audiences on these platforms.
This is true,
and it varies, especially depends on times of day, whether it's weekend, whether it's weekday, etc. So a little thought can be put into what kind of content goes on what platform and the time at which it's delivered.
Very interesting. Would you say that's something that would be tied to the policy per se, or tied to understanding use of social media, which then becomes the role of the person who's employed in that position, like basically knowing your job?
In terms of fitting into policy, I think the reason it fits into policy, it depends too on the nature of the organization. Again, so I'm speaking from a governmental perspective. So the certain things that we have to pause, if we post it past a certain time, we're gonna miss a window of opportunity. If we also put certain things on certain platforms, they're not going to have the same reception. So it's important to also to kind of avoid wasted effort. And so in that sense, I think policy-wise is still a kind of important thing to make note of.
Thank you, Michael. That's not unique to you. That's not unique to a government organization. That holds true across the board. I'm going to ask Martin to give his input on that. Martin, what Michael is speaking about is understanding the strengths and weaknesses of various platforms and knowing how to use each platform based on its strengths and weaknesses. So like knowing target audiences, and knowing which message, what type of message is more appropriate for a particular platform, and when to post, so in order to get the largest uptake on that post. Is that something from your experience, Morhan, that you would say would be incorporated into the policy, or is that something that would be more in terms of understanding the strengths and weaknesses of those platforms, which would be expected with your job title, from your experience with drafting policies over the years?
Well, I would say probably, deferring to your expertise, obviously, that this is something that needs to be considered when a company undertakes the pre-policy analysis. Excuse me. To the extent that an analysis shows that there are specific problems there that need to be addressed because they result in poor information or fake news, or because there are other issues that need to be dealt with, then they should be incorporated in the analysis, and therefore there may be a policy objective that specifically addresses those problems and so on.
I think he was more speaking to the strengths and weaknesses of platforms. So for example, you may know, for example, that Facebook tends to be a platform that people would more use when, first of all, it's an older audience, and then they're more likely to use it when they come home from work and they've settled down and they're relaxing and they're scrolling through Facebook. Whereas Instagram tends to be something that people check in at various points of the day. So you're more likely to get a larger uptick if you post on Facebook. I find here in Barbados, it's usually around 7:45, because around 7 o'clock, people are paying attention to the news. Around 7:45, you had your sports news going into I'm using Barbados as the example, going into international news. And that's when you get a fall off in attention to the news, and people are more likely to pick up their phones then and start scrolling through Facebook. Instagram, on the other hand, you can post on Instagram throughout the day, and you're getting people paying attention because the nature of the platform doesn't require as much attention. It's photos, it's short posts, and so on. So what Michael is suggesting is that the policy should outline how to use each platform in terms of the best time of day to use it, in terms of the best type of message, wording. Twitter is 240 characters. So that's what Michael's suggesting. And I was just wondering, would that be something that would be worked into the policy?
No, I think it definitely could. It could make a distinction between these different platforms and their use, and perhaps the different problems that they generate. I don't know. Are messages on Facebook more factual, or are they less subject to fake news than those on Instagram or Twitter or some of these? I don't know the answer to that, but the analysis would show that, and that to the extent then that some of these platforms definitely show a more pronounced problem in that sense, the policy could, address those specifically through an objective and particular actions that at least staff members, remember, we're talking about policy with the company, not for anybody outside of the company, obviously. So that, different actors or all staff should observe when they use one platform versus another or something like that. But yes, absolutely. If the analysis shows that this is an issue, then it should be addressed in the policy.
I think we're still on slightly different points, but I'll delve into it some more on a one-on-one with you, Martin, in our postmortem, because he wasn't so much speaking about the problems various platforms pose, but how to use each platform to gain greater exposure. So we can delve into that some more. And Michael, I welcome having you perhaps involved in that conversation with Dr. Emick and myself. Just being cognizant of time because we're at 11:39. We have Marlene and Joette with hands up. We're supposed to wrap up at 11:30. So I'm sorry. I'm really glad it's been so interactive, but let's go with, I think Marlene had her hand up before. Marlene and then Joette. And then Joelle. Marlene?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Yes. Just to follow up on some of the things that Esther spoke about, the issue with the WhatsApp groups, that's one that I've had a personal experience with. And my question is, how do we fit in monitoring? If it's a WhatsApp group with a bunch of friends, in my instance, encountered, it was a matter that it was screenshotted and shared. Now, had it not been passed on to me, I would not have known that it was that it took place. So that's one of the questions there. And then the other is looking at, also we speak very much about what we post, but also interactions matter, again, from personal experience. My sales team liked something, the competitor saw it and ultimately was upset because she interacted with their competition. So, and somebody like that may not be, is unaware completely of the type of objectivity she has to have. So monitoring interactions or even providing guidelines for interactions is also something beyond just
that's Marlene, that's covered. Bear in mind that this presentation is a concise version of the framework document, but we do cover interactions, how people comment on posts and so on. And it's really interesting that you mentioned your experience, because this came up quite a bit in the Tuesday session, is what we discussed, how these interactions can impact the company in terms of offending sponsors. So that is definitely something that you want to take into consideration. With regards to WhatsApp groups, that's true. That's a difficult something to monitor, but that's no different from a staff member being on Facebook and commenting, and their status is set to friends only as opposed to public. So they can have their status set to friends only. You're not able to see what they're posting, and someone can screenshot it and share that, and it can go, it can be made public. So what I will say is the powers that be within the organizations, you need to sit down, discuss among yourselves, and then also invite staff and discuss with them how you approach these individual challenges. Because remember, the framework's just a guide. We can't tell you how to police your station. We can guide you on how to go about it. And one of the important things we put forward here is that staff must be involved. They must feel like they're part of the process. And that is one of the best ways to tackle head on the feeling of staff. And this is something that came up quite a bit in the surveys, that they're being told what to do, and they're being told what to do in their private time, and that organizations are infringing on their right to free speech. There's not going to be a situation where everybody's going to agree on both sides, but you need to work toward finding a middle ground and come away from it so that people do not feel like their opinion does not matter and their voices are not heard. So it is a matter of involving staff in the process, not just having them having a meeting and hearing what they say and then you walk away and you don't take any of it into account, but involving them in the process and throughout the process, not just at the beginning, but all throughout. And then also having regular assessments, whether you revisit that policy once a year, because like Dr. Emick said earlier, it's a living document. You don't just write it and it ends there. Social media is still new. and laws are now being enacted around it. So you need to pay attention to what's going on legally in your country, different developments that are happening across social media, and you need to be able to go back to that policy and edit it and put out a new version. And when you do that, engage staff again and constantly ensure that they're up to date with what's going on. Okay. Is Joette and then Joelle. Joette? You're muted.
Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
good.
I heard you say Joelle, so I thought you meant somebody
No,
else.
I said Joette and then Joelle.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Actually, you covered a lot of what I was going to say, but to the gentleman that spoke to what to post on different platforms, I have found that well, one, I do think that it's specific, but I have found that
again,
with the company
Joette, your voice fell out there just now. Can you say that again? You found that it is what?
Saying that I found that it's company specific, one.
Yes.
And you should also, I think, that analytics come into play when it comes to what you post on what channels. What I've done, I've only been in the role here, I think, about 3 months, but what I've done is, because most of feel that we post comes from the corporation and their different entities that's across radio and television, is that we post different things on different platforms depending on the analytics. And the thing that I think some people found surprising here is when you delve into the analytics on Facebook, you find that the analytics on Facebook is sort of different than the analytics that we think we have on television. Because our Facebook analytics it trends younger than television. So you would have our marketing people here would think that our audience is more mature, but on Facebook the audience is actually in 20s to mid 30s.
Yes.
When it comes to, I don't remember the gentleman's name who spoke to
Michael.
To post on Michael. Yes. Yeah. I found that analytics sort of helps because I don't post as much on Instagram as I would post on Facebook, because I find that people on go up their feed less. So the people on Instagram, they go up their feed more than on Facebook. So I would actually post more to Facebook, but it all depends on analytics. And once you get in, and once you're in front of platforms every day, you tend to get a feel for how people behave on them.
Thank you, Joette.
And then
sorry, let me just jump in a
next
second.
Thing was the last thing. Sure. Okay.
Joette, I just want to jump in and add to what you were saying. I completely agree with what you just said. And that's why my feeling is that to get really specific of what to post, where to post, and what times to post it, I don't think that the right place for that per se is in the policy. I do think that broadly speaking, the policy should outline paying attention to analytics in order to ensure that you maximize the visibility that you can get. But saying exactly what, where, when, why, how, I don't think that necessarily should be in the policy. That's just my view. I'm going to discuss it further with Dr. Inmit, because I think how he was interpreting it was more in terms of things like libel and fake news and stuff like that, as opposed to best times to post and so on. So thank you for sharing that, because I'm totally in agreement with you. You were going to make another point.
Yeah, the other point that I was going to make, I don't anybody else, if you found this in the interviews and the surveys that you've done, but I think I made it when we first started. I I think that we have to, and maybe people from other countries have done this already and can comment on it, but that where there has to be a sort of line between HR policies that govern all the employees when it comes to social media, and then specific policies that govern people who have specific roles.
Yes.
And I think that goes from actually participating in social media all the way to what you can post on social media.
Yes.
You mentioned when you were speaking, I think it was Marlene, if I'm pronouncing that right. She was speaking to WhatsApp and whatnot. And what I find with WhatsApp is that you can have your opinions and whatnot, but sometimes it really comes down to how you say what you're saying, so that it doesn't come off as if you're being contrary to corporate to your corporate policy, etc. But the specific analogy that she gave, I think that speaks to trust, because when you post in certain groups, especially if you're thinking that it's only your friends, then you have to be guarded about what you post anywhere. For someone like me, even though I'm the digital manager, I'm not the face of the corporation. So I think that my consideration slightly different than, say, a reporter, or say the general manager, or say a radio personality, people who are known. I think that these are things that we have to take into consideration too, and putting people into the categories that they should be in. Those who are known do, and their face and their voice, etc., is trusted by the wider public, and then those who just work for a corporation.
So thank you very much, Joette. What I will say is, I think a lot of the people who joined the Thursday session got the information late, and so ended up coming on the Thursday session instead of the Tuesday session. I'm not sure when you got the framework, if you had a chance to go through it, but this is, when I say you, I mean everyone. This is covered in the framework when we speak about the different actor groups, and we speak about the public facing staff and staff that are not public facing. And even among the public facing staff, we speak about those who are governed by the tenets of journalism versus those who are entertainers. So you take into consideration those different actor groups. And one of the things we suggest, and some organizations felt this was necessary and some felt it was not, is that you can have different guidelines within that policy for different persons depending on their role. So you may have, I'm going to use Barbados as an example, Admiral Nelson, who is a very famous presenter on the radio here in Barbados. He's very polarizing. People tune in to hear his view because he never falls short of sharing his opinion, and his opinions are usually very polarizing. There's no in between. People either completely agree with him or completely disagree with him. But that is part of what makes the station successful. Everybody wants to tune in to hear Admiral talk. Even if he's talking foolishness, people want to tune in to hear his foolishness, right? So you don't want to stymie that, because that's what makes his station one of the leading stations people listen to at that time of the day when he's on. On the other hand, you don't want to have him say something that is so offensive, it offends sponsors and it completely goes against what the company stands for. So you need to get that balance for someone like him. On the other hand, you don't want to have a reporter doing what Admiral does. Yeah. So you may need a separate set of guidelines for your reporters that the public looks to for truth, fact, knowledge, objectivity. Now, some of the stations in the surveys agreed this was absolutely necessary, and a few of them said, no, we want everybody to follow the same rules that the journalists are following. You have to make that determination as to what works for your company based on your operation, based on how big your operation is, based on how your staff, whether it be journalists or DJs or whatever, how they are received by the public, and how the public views or what credence the public gives to their personal opinions. So it can't be one thing for everyone. You need to discuss what works for your station, but you take all these things into consideration and they're all outlined in a framework. Okay, Joel, your turn, and then we got to wrap it up.
Hello, yes, I'm here again. So you've covered a lot of what I want to say, so I'm just going to make a comment. I think a social media policy is especially necessary given the rise of social media and the rise of new media and media convergence. I must say the framework is quite comprehensive, and I also would like to say kudos to the crafters and those who did the groundwork. It most certainly is necessary and will help the region to formulate their own policies. And one of the issues I foresee would be a pushback, and as you rightfully said, would be the personnel or staff. So that requires companies, of course, to engage the staff to get a buy-in, so to speak, from them, for them to understand effectively the need for them to understand how to post on social media and the impact it has on the reputation of the company. You know, because one may feel what is true of the part is true of the whole, although you may think that this is your personal space and you can post whatever you need. But of course, like other HR policies, there need to be ramifications if there are breaches as well going forward. So thank you. This session was quite informative, and I look forward to developing our own policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Joel. Much appreciated. Okay, well, I would love to stay and chat all day with you guys, but I do have a lecture I have to rush off to give. If not, I would, you know, run longer if I had the time. But you can feel free to reach out to me and share any additional comments you have, and I will try and respond accordingly or ensure they're reflected in our summaries. But I just want to say thank you guys so much for being here today and for how interactive you have been. It is deeply appreciative. And I'm glad that you're also vested in this process. I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Imick to give his final thoughts.
Well, Manny, to echo, I think, obviously our expectation is that the investment of your time, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours, and reading the framework document that you feel has been useful. We hope actually that it will incentivize a process in your respective companies to actually start working on drafting a social media policy, that you will take the opportunity to undertake some first analysis before you do that, before you draft policy. And indeed, that this is a process, as now repeatedly has been said also by some of the participants, that this is a participatory and exclusive process that includes all the staff, so that all of the staff members feel they're owners of this policy, and it's not just sort of another thing that is imposed upon them and so on. So thank you all for your contributions. And I think some of this will spark a little bit more discussion between Marsha and myself, perhaps even some adjustments. And as she already indicated, anything after this session that you wish to share with her specifically or with us, please feel free to do so, and it's very much appreciated. So
may I just jump in a second, Dr. Imick? I just want to add, this may be helpful for you as you move forward, and Dr. Imick spoke about you know, your analysis prior to drafting the policy. And what we would have done is there were pre-interviews that were done with experts, so people who have been in media for a long time, media managers and so on, to hear what some of the unique challenges are in media overall and in their organizations. Then I would have conducted some surveys with various, we had media managers and then we had the practitioners. So it could be, under managers, we would have things like editors, news directors, general managers, and then the practitioners. Now we would have the journalists, the persons who post on social media, and there were slightly different questions depending on whether that person falls into management or not, because you want to get both opinions. You don't want it to seem like management just sharing their opinion and telling staff what they are to do. So there were slightly different questions from managers versus the journalists, DJs, entertainers, so on. And then based on the responses of those questions, that's how we came up with what we addressed in the framework, which you will then use to guide you with your policy. So a similar approach would be helpful as you set about developing your own policies, you know, engaging the experts, conducting surveys with staff at different levels, using those responses to assist you with formulating your policies, guided by the outline set out in the framework. And if you go to the appendices of the framework, you can see the questions that we would have drafted for both groups of persons that we interviewed. So I hope that's helpful. Okay. All right. Well, that's it from Dr. Inmake and from me. Thanks again so much for participating today. Feel free to reach out to me with anything you want to add. I wish you all a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of the week.
Sorry, before you close, Marsha, are you
Mhm.
going to be sending us the presentation at all, the slide presentation?
Sure, I can make that available. It won't be immediately after this session because I'm running very late for my lecture, but if you send me a reminder, you can do it via WhatsApp if you wish, or better to do it by email. I can forward the presentation to via the same email that I would have sent out to everyone with a link for today's session. Okay. All right. I think that covers everything. Thank you. I'm now seeing the messages in the chat. So for those of you who wrote in the chat, thanks very much for your kind words. Much appreciative. All right. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.